Welcome back to episode 71 of In the Shadow of the Evening
71.
Trees. I'm Jen Von Ebers.
I'm David Von Ebers, or Dave, or in Arabic, Daoud.
Oh, there you go. I did not know that.
You didn't expect it either,
I
did
did
you?
not.
Gotcha. I had a language arts, meaning what? English, really.
Right.
Teacher in junior high school who was a former Catholic nun who left the order and married a Muslim man from Egypt.
Yes.
And she told me at some point when I was in junior high school that
That's what your name is.
my name in Arabic was Daoud.
All right. Well, maybe I'll just pepper that in once in a while.
Yeah, I'll have to look it up in other languages.
Yes. We may have an interruption of our cats. They might...
Fair warning.
Yeah, they were in here, they left, we've shut the door, so that might just be a slight interruption, but that's just our show. That's what happens.
Yeah.
So last week had talked about the first week of Trump being in office and everything, and not that every episode is going to be about politics. However, it's been weighing heavy on my heart.
Yeah, really.
And I said to David, I'm like, let's just talk about it just a little bit more, because I know so many of you who are friends of ours who follow us are feeling the same kind of angst and everything. And I think the biggest word that I can describe is upheaval. You know, it's just like so much upheaval in such a small amount of time that it's just like insane that all of this is happening at such a quick and fiery pace. It's like you can't even keep up with it, because so many things are just changing and new policies in place and things like that, and it's just overwhelming and it's disheartening. I said to David, it's embarrassing.
It absolutely is embarrassing. That's the word for it.
And it's just kind of like, what is going on?
I don't know what's going on. Yeah, I mean, they clearly came into office with the idea of sowing as much chaos as possible, as quickly as possible, to just kind of knock everybody off their game. And to some degree, of course, that's working, you know, because of like you say, the upheaval, the chaos and everything. Nobody really knows exactly how to rein all this in. It's interesting to me that a lot of private organizations and some, state level government officials have rushed into court right off the bat to challenge some of the things that Trump is doing. And I think that's really, really the right move. I think, hey, they did it when Biden was in office. They would go and file lawsuits in the federal district court in some part of Texas where they knew they were going to have a favorable judge. Well, the thing about being the federal government is you're everywhere. So people can sue you everywhere, including in, Washington State, which was one of the recent cases where a trial judge entered a TRO against Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship. We could talk about that at some point, but you can sue wherever you think you have the best likelihood of prevailing.
Yeah.
Because that's what conservatives did. That's what Republicans did. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, my friends. And I know they all believe that these cases will ultimately end up in the Supreme Court, so they're going to win anyway, but that isn't necessarily the case. There's a lot of cases the Supreme Court probably just won't waste their time with, in which case, if a more liberal Federal Circuit Court of Appeals upholds something a trial judge does in Washington State or in California or New York or Chicago, guess what, kids? You're going to be stuck with it. Sorry.
Yeah.
That's off the topic, but I just wanted to point that out.
No, it is true. And it's just, I think the biggest thing, there's so many, but
there's so many.
One of the things that truly bothered me was the halt of federal funds to all these agencies. And I think that Trump thinks like he can just turn off a switch and just be like, I don't want to do this, with no ramification of like what will happen if who's affected by this, kind of thing. And for so many people who rely on that money for food stamps, for Section 8 housing, for nursing homes, for parents who have children who have disables, disabled in adult care facilities are affected. I mean, there's just like all these humanitarian efforts, everything. There's just so many things are affected by that. And even though they've temporarily rescinded that, it's like that's not permanent. You know, it can still come back. Federal Pell Grants, student loans, the FAFSA, everyone's, you know, for college. I mean, it's just like and that's the upheaval that I just cannot stand. It's just like it's putting millions of people in questioning about like what's going to happen with my life, especially like with FEMA for all the people who are affected by the hurricanes. They applied for FEMA before he came into office, approved. Now he wants to take FEMA away. What can they rebuild? You know, like all that stuff.
Right. Yeah, and there's, you know, it's pretty clear too that if Congress allocates money for a particular thing, the president doesn't have the authority to not spend the money. That's actually not something the president can do. You can, you know, the president has the ability to veto a spending bill, but it's for Congress to decide how the money is spent, and the president doesn't have the authority to say no. So that's pretty clear, and in fact, they backed off of that one pretty quickly, but you know they're going to try to do it anyway.
Yes, they will.
And there are stories now about Elon Musk's, this fake department. It's not a department. A department is a legal term. A department means an official department of the executive branch of government that has to be created by statute, and it has the, you know, there's confirmation processes and all that for department heads and all that sort of thing. So this Department of Government Efficiency is not a department. You can call it an office, like there's an Office of Management and Budget that isn't an official quote unquote government department. But you got all these people who are not government employees running around harassing actual government employees, making demands of actual government employees.
Asking for information.
Asking for the people that we pay with our tax dollars. They're trying to get into computer systems to get information that private citizens are not entitled to. You know, if they go in and get tax, you know, information from the IRS, that's your private information. It's my private information. The IRS takes a lot of steps to actually protect the confidentiality of people's tax information and things like their social security numbers and all that stuff. And, you know, what we've got with Musk and these people in this alleged department, they're basically hackers. They're computer hackers that are going in and trying to access government information that they're not entitled to. And you understand, when we say they're not entitled to it, that's because it's our information. It's information about people. It's statistical information that the government gathers. It's information about people's private lives that the government might have some legitimate use for, but at the same time, they actually try to protect from malicious third parties, right? So you might not like the fact that the government collects this information, but you sure don't want some weirdo from Silicon Valley getting their hands on it. And then there's another thing about, and I don't know how accurate this is, I don't know if this would ever come to fruition, but apparently they're trying to figure out how they can use computer systems to shut off funding for, you know, because no one's writing checks anymore. Everything is electronic transfers and so forth. So it's all done through computer networks. And if you could figure out a way to effectively sort of turn the switch off so that the money doesn't go from the Treasury to a particular, you know, either government agency or an NGO that the government funds or something like that, you know, they're trying to backdoor. This is all unethical behavior. It's hacking. It's not something that private parties should have anything to do with or have any ability to do. And so, I mean, we've created an absolute monster.
Well, and I was telling David that the bad part of, I mean, all of it's bad, but
all of it is bad.
He is 78 years old. You know, if he lives through this election and everything, all the damage that is happening and will happen over the next 4 years that could take another decade to unravel, he's not going to live to see the ramifications of that. So, like, he doesn't care about, like, what in the future is going to happen to his grandchildren, you know, whatever, or obviously Americans, because he doesn't care about that either, is like all the things that he's doing now, it's just setting us up for just heartache and disaster later down the road. So I don't like that either.
I don't either. Yeah, it is a nightmare situation for the country, and that, working with these tech bros, for lack of a better term, like Musk. Somebody pointed out the other day that Vivek, how do we pronounce his name? Ramaswamy? I don't want to be a jerk and mispronounce his name,
yes.
even though I don't care for the guy. But, he got let go from this supposed department, and a lot of people are now thinking that he may very well have been the one who said, look, some of what you want to do is illegal, you can't do these things, and they canned him for it.
Right.
I'm not defending the guy. I don't care for him at all, and I wish he had never gotten involved in this mess in the first place. But it is interesting why he suddenly went away when, things were just ramping up.
And the other thing that is disheartening is the return to office situation, for all of the federal workers to basically been giving a 2-week notice to come back, kind of thing. Yeah. And trying to figure that out. And then it's like, well, and if you don't want to do that, resign, or, right. We'll pay you for the next 6 months and then, you're done, kind of thing. And for all those people who moved not very close to their office, is there an office space for them, kind of like, and that's another decision that is made without figuring out, like, do we have space for all these people? Where are they going to go? Yeah. Where are they going to park? How, what's the transportation situation? How is it going to affect their childcare? Anything? None of that is taken into consideration. It's just a blanket. This is what's happening. I don't care.
And this is, and it's just a spiteful thing. Mm-hmm. They're doing it out of spite. Which I understand if you're Jerry Seinfeld and you want to return a jacket out of spite. I'm all for that. But they're doing this out of spite because these technology CEOs just have it in their heads that everybody has to work in the office. But the irony is, if you're talking about efficiency, it is actually much more efficient to have people work from home and not have to pay for office space for those people.
Yes.
So from an efficiency point of view, it makes no sense at all.
It doesn't. So I feel sorry for the thousands of people who are affected by that, because it's like, then you have to make a decision. Well, I guess I'm looking for a new job. And also all the people who have been fired already, who've had, decades of experience in politics, in the federal office and everything, those people are just like, just go, kind of thing. And it's just, that part stinks too. Because those are the people who really know how all this works. Trump does not.
And neither does Musk or just about anybody who's around Trump.
Yeah.
They're clueless about how government works.
Exactly. Even, we'll get into RFK at some point, but he just asking a basic question: do you know the difference between Medicare A and B? Could not answer that question.
Right.
Could not answer that question.
The guy who wants to be head of Health and Human Services.
Yes. It's just a lot to deal with.
Right, and the thing is you make a really good point, is that there are people in government who actually are experts at what they do. I remember, this is a small example, but years and years and years ago, when I was still in law school, I worked for a company, or it's not a company, it's an organization, part of the Legal Services Corporation that was known in Chicago at the time as the Legal Assistance Foundation. Now it's called Legal Aid Chicago. But basically it was, providing free legal assistance to low-income people. And a lot of the people that we worked with were on general assistance, public assistance, and sometimes for whatever regulatory reason or another, they'd lose their benefits. They'd come to us and say, what can we do? And I had a good friend who happened to work for what was then called the Department of Public Aid in Illinois. And, he knew all the rules and regulations inside and out. And I would call him and say, in hypothetical terms, what can a person do in this situation? And because he had spent quite a bit of time working for that branch of government and understood the ins and outs of it, and because that branch of government, or that department, I should say, existed to help people, not to take benefits away from people,
Right.
he would explain what the specific rules and regulations are because he was an expert in that area. And then I could, go to a hearing with a client and sit across the table from someone from public aid and speak with some authority because I actually knew what I was talking about. But that's the thing about a lot, like the vast majority of government employees are people who just go to work every day and do the thing they need to do because they understand the ins and outs and the technical requirements of the job. And government is very complicated.
So complicated.
Right? And they're not all, people think that all government employees are lazy and all they do is spend government money. There's a whole bunch of government employees who do things like try to catch fraud, right? Like during COVID, there were a lot of scams where people tried to apply for...
I was part of that.
Yeah, people would try to apply for unemployment benefits in someone else's name as a form of identity theft.
That happened to me.
Yeah, and my company happens to provide a lot of solutions for government agencies, and one of them is the Illinois Department of Employment Security, which handles unemployment claims. And they have people within that department who's, obviously, as I said before, most of the people who work for those agencies are actually trying to help people, but they also employ people who are trying to detect fraud.
Right.
And if you start slashing budgets, are they going to cut the people who provide the legitimate benefits to people, or are they going to cut the people who are trying to catch fraud, or both? It's not an automatic thing that if you slash government budgets and you lay people off, that you're going to have a more efficient government.
No.
It can actually backfire. Plus, it's our tax dollars. We're paying for these services, right? So Elon Musk doesn't get to decide how someone else spends my tax dollars. I vote for people who support policies. Those policies turn into government agencies and spending and so forth and so on. That's what I voted for. You don't get to decide that goes away just because you're some nerd from Silicon Valley by way of apartheid South Africa and you think that you should decide how my tax dollars
Because you're a billionaire?
No, man.
No, I don't think so.
F that.
Exactly. Well, we could say the whole word because we can title this explicit. And then the other huge thing was the unfortunate airplane crash that happened. And
very much related to what we're talking about.
Yes, and the press around that and everything, and Trump, instead of like just being empathetic, can't be, because he can't be, it decided that he was going to decide that because of DEI that caused the plane crash.
Everything is, I said on, I'm on that Blue Sky thing, which is a less toxic version of Twitter, basically. And I said, DEI shot a man in Reno just to watch him die. They're going to blame everything because they don't believe, the people in the Trump White House and a good many Republicans and a good many conservatives really don't believe that women are capable of doing the same jobs as men, that black people are capable of doing the same jobs as white people, that gay people are, able to do the same jobs as straight people, or transgender people as cisgender people. They really believe that. They
100%.
really believe that a black pilot is less skilled than a white pilot. A black air traffic controller is less skilled than a white. They're going after the pilot of the helicopter, who apparently was a woman, but the Department of Defense doesn't want to release her name because the family asked them not to, because they're afraid of the outpouring of hate that they're likely to get when their family member died in an accident.
Right.
But also, since Trump came into office, they've slashed the FAA budget, the TSA budget. They've cut back on, the people who are trying to guarantee airport safety and air flight safety, if that's a word.
Correct.
And so you can't necessarily say that Trump caused the accident because he's only been in office for a short period of time. But he's certainly not doing anything to make those accidents less likely, again, because he's slashing budgets and taking people out of government who actually have the expertise to do the jobs.
Right. And that's the thing. It's like you can't just bring in or hire somebody else with no experience, no knowledge of that, then you're just getting somebody in. It's just a disaster. So that made me mad because he didn't even know anything about any of the people involved of who, before even bringing that up. And, when pressed, he just will not let that go, that go. Which then obviously before that, because of all that, rolling DEI initiatives back for corporations, how many companies just were like, okay, fine, we're just going to roll it back.
They just
and
caved
immediately.
Target looking at you.
Yes, exactly.
And they're certainly not the only one.
Although I was happy that Costco is one that didn't do that.
Costco said, come and take it.
Yeah, exactly. JP Morgan Chase, I worked for them for 14 years.
Yeah.
Apple, thank you. Pinterest.
My company
Microsoft
is not backing off.
Yeah, so there's a lot of companies who obviously didn't cave to that, but so many that did right away. So I follow a Black creator, Tabitha Brown, and she has gotten her products in Target. She has a clothing line, she's got a food line, cookware, all this stuff and everything. And I did see, people were coming after her, like, why didn't you just take your stuff out immediately? Which she's like, I understand, but she's like, you don't understand, what do I do with all the stuff? It's not like you can take it from, 1,000 stores and store it into some...
I apologize for interrupting you, but why should a Black woman have to bear that burden? Why should it be her responsibility to try to fight back? It's our responsibility as white folks and anybody with, in a privileged position. We're the ones who should be fighting back. Don't make a Black person say, I'm the victim of this and I have to fight for everybody else too?
Yes,
no, that's not how it works.
I know.
That's not how it works at all.
Exactly. Man. So it's just...
welcome to Black History Month.
Yeah. So, and it's just one of those things that it hurts so many people that are marginalized already. There's another person who, she had a reality show with her husband, but she is a little person. She's a doctor and everything. Right. And so she is, and then she has been a doctor for like 20 years and everything, and saying like, we already have the hardest time in our lives anyway, dealing with all the things that we have to deal with, but then to have that taken away, it just makes it, that much harder. And because he does have no empathy, he doesn't mingle with people with any sort of disability, any sort of hardship, because he, is just around people who are the wealthiest of the wealthiest, and never have a problem.
That is absolutely true.
Have never had to go to a grocery store to figure out, like, I've got $20 to feed my family, what should I buy this week, kind of thing. That is never going to happen to them, so they can't empathize with somebody who's just trying to get along and things like that.
Right, and you touched on something really important too, is that, the federal government referred to these policies not just as DEI, but DEIA, and the A stands for accessibility. Mm-hmm. And, this is something, again, I don't want to keep talking about my employer, but my company not only has active DEI programs, but we are very much involved in trying to, we produce a lot of software and we produce a lot of stuff that is available over the internet, right? And so accessibility is a huge issue. And we're trying to, there's a law in Canada about accessibility of things that are available on the web. And we're making huge efforts to make sure that all of our content is accessible. But that's been a part of the, the federal government's approach, is to say diversity, equity, inclusion also includes accessibility. You can't have inclusion and equity and so forth without making everything accessible to people who have any kind of disability. And that's a huge issue.
Yes.
This is something I take very, very personally because, I've dealt with mental health issues, as we've talked about on this show before. And that's an accessibility issue on some level, but not like people with physical disabilities. But I've certainly known many people. I'm very proud of this. I went to the University of Illinois in Urbana, Illinois. It was one of the first universities in the country to actually design campus facilities around accessibility, going way back to the post-World War II period. And a lot of that was to help veterans coming back from World War II, but it's expanded way beyond that. So I take this very personally because this is something that's been big in my life experience for a long time, is making sure and believing in accessibility. I've worked with lawyers who fought these issues, including a guy who is now a federal judge in Chicago, Bob Gettleman. So, this is a big deal. To cut out the accessibility piece in and of itself is horrendous. And Trump, again, when it comes to talking about the air crash in D.C., was making all kinds of crazy assertions about folks with disabilities working in aviation, a lot of which was simply flat out untrue. But of course, even though you can say, well, these things aren't true, it feeds into the perspective that people with disabilities are less capable of doing ordinary jobs, which is nonsense. It's absolute nonsense. Just like attacking a DEI in quotation marks, which means that you don't think black folks are capable of doing jobs or women are capable of doing jobs or whatever.
And
it's
we
the
can
worst.
also go back to when Trump came to Chicago last summer and did a press thing, and the woman who was interviewing him asked him, what does DEI mean? And he could not answer it. He could not answer it. He didn't know what it stood for. He danced around the whole issue and everything, and she was very, very, wouldn't let that go, because it's like, you want to be the president of the United States and you don't even know what this is. Sorry, I had my pen. I was just like...
For those of you listening to the audio, Jennifer was wagging her pen.
I was wagging my pen.
She was using it in an assertive manner.
So it isn't something new that he doesn't know what the DEI, what it is. So that has just been something that you just know. And I always am curious of, him planning to come back into office, let's just say a year in advance, of like putting all these things in place, of saying like, almost like, if I win, these are the things I would, are my wishes, kind of thing, and then just unwielding them.
Well, it's Project 2025, which
yes.
He, of course, distanced himself from during the campaign, and then immediately started implementing all these ideas right off the bat. I mean, that's where the birthright citizenship comes from. If you don't know what that refers to, and I don't mean to sound condescending, but, as a lawyer, we tend to throw around a lot of words and phrases that normal people might not necessarily be used to, because lawyers are weird. And so I try not to be...
Speaking layman's terms.
I try to be less of a wonk. But so the 14th Amendment, among other things, the 14th Amendment guarantees equal protection of the law, meaning basically the state can't discriminate against you. And it guarantees due process. And it also says, essentially, anyone who is born in the United States is a citizen from birth. That's why they call it birthright citizenship. It kind of makes sense. And, it's pretty clear. The language itself is pretty clear. The United States Supreme Court decided a case on 120 years ago where they said, yeah, this is what it says and this is what it means.
End of story.
End of story. So Trump signs an executive order banning it or outlawing it or whatever. It makes no sense. I mean, even if you could interpret the language of the 14th Amendment differently, the President of the United States can't, with the stroke of a pen, change what the Constitution means, and certainly can't override a Supreme...
He thinks he can.
He thinks he can. I have to laugh because I've mentioned him before. There is a constitutional law professor named Anthony Michael Kreis. I think that's how you pronounce it, Kreis, who taught for a while in Chicago, but now teaches at Georgia State in Atlanta. And I think he's from Atlanta originally. Anyway, he's a brilliant constitutional law professor, but he got into back and forth with a guy who is up at the University of Minnesota, although I'm a little confused because he also has ties to Arizona State, and he has a law practice in Arizona State. His name is, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing it, it's Elon Musk. And as I mentioned earlier, there was a federal judge in Washington State who said that Trump's executive order on birthright citizenship was blatantly unconstitutional. And this fellow, Professor Werman, was very offended by this. How dare the judge make this, at a preliminary hearing, how could he jump to this conclusion when there's literature? He said, there's literature on why birthright citizenship doesn't mean what it means. And Professor Christ was taken aback and gave him a bit of a talking to on social media. But it cracks me up because today I saw my law school alma mater, the University of Illinois College of Law, posted on Facebook that the judge had plenty of good reason for calling it blatantly unconstitutional. And I just thought it was pretty funny because it's almost like they were trolling this guy from Minnesota.
Yes.
I looked into his background, and I feel bad picking on this one individual law professor because there are a lot of boneheads out there. He's not the only one. But I looked into his background, and he's very young, which doesn't surprise me in and of itself. But also, he has practiced law. I will give him credit for that. He's been in a courtroom, unlike some folks. But his background, it really seems to be focused on things like filing a bunch of lawsuits in Arizona challenging COVID restrictions. And so, needless to say, that's kind of
that's
what
all I need to know.
that's kind of what I would have expected.
Right.
Yeah. So, when the United States Supreme Court announces that this is what the plain language of the 14th Amendment says, and this is what it means, and they did that 120 years ago.
And it doesn't matter what literature is out
Right,
there.
exactly.
That doesn't really actually
Exactly
change
right.
anything. You could say anything about anything.
I got to be honest with you. I'm surprised, as someone who litigated for decades, I'm surprised that that's all the judge said. That he only said it's blatantly constitutional. I'm surprised he didn't threaten him with sanctions at this point. Not Werman. Werman's a law professor. I mean,
Right.
the lawyer who represented the president in this case. I'm really surprised that, to me, that's the least harsh thing that the judge could have said, was that it was blatantly unconstitutional.
Right.
Why? Because there's the plain language of the 14th Amendment and a United States Supreme Court case that says so.
Ay.
So I had to vent a little bit about apologies to Professor Werman. But you're dead wrong.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then the other thing, that we won't even know what the ramifications are for a while, but I'm sure we'll know very shortly, is the tariffs.
Oh, God.
And that whole business, which I believe is supposed to start today. I don't even know if it actually happened, but today was supposed to be the day of charging countries money for things that they give us.
Yeah, and I can't find it quickly. I should have looked this up before, or I should have bookmarked it. So I'll apologize in advance for not getting this accurately. But I saw that there is an auto parts manufacturer they're located in Canada. They have factories in Canada, the United States, and Mexico. And the woman who's the CEO of the company was saying that, it's unsustainable if they impose 25% tariffs on that company because they're in Canada and in Mexico. Nobody can withstand a 25% increase in the cost of those component parts. And we've talked about that exact issue before.
Right.
So, the way she views it is it's going to grind auto manufacturing to a halt throughout North America because the companies that make the auto parts aren't going to be able to absorb those tariffs without raising prices. GM and other companies are not going to want to pay 25% more for their parts. And she's saying the jobs that are at risk here are mostly in the United States.
Right. And that's the thing. And then it's like, then he doesn't understand that could eventually pass on to then the consumer. The consumer is going to absorb that. So that is the one part where I think that a lot of people who were on the Trump campaign trail talking about tariffs when they had no idea what a tariff was, I've never heard of it, assumed that it was just like just another thing where he's going to flip a switch and all of a sudden, billions of dollars is going to funnel into the United States without any ramification coming back.
The company, by the way, is called Linmar Corporation, and
Okay.
they are located, their headquarters are in Guelph, Ontario.
Oh, Guelph, Ontario.
Yeah, I'm feverishly Googling. I did I spelled the name wrong first, so that was my first mistake, and it brought up all kinds of weird results. And then I'm like, Canadian Auto Parts, and then that brings up like, AutoZone in Toronto or something like that. And so then I was smart enough to put Canadian Auto Parts manufacturers. But it's interesting that when you Google that phrase, there's a whole bunch of them located in Canada. Magna International, Linmar Corporation was the one I was talking about, Motor Coach Industries Limited, ATS Corporation, anyway, General Motors Canada, so the impacts are going to be potentially very severe.
And the other thing that people who were like, oh yes, tariffs, let's do this, let's get money, did not consider what other countries would retaliate against us, even though we don't want that, or they don't want that. It's like, just because he's going to say that doesn't mean that they also won't impose another thing for us, kind of thing. So that part is people don't think about as well, as like they're not just gonna like bow down and say, oh, of course, without some kind of retaliation.
And the CEO of that I just don't want to make statements without attribution. Her name is Linda Hasenfratz. But and again, you could say, oh well, yeah, but she's the CEO of the company. She's just saying that, because it's in her company's interest to fight back against the tariffs. Maybe that doesn't mean she's wrong.
Right.
Anyway, all right. So that's the other thing. There is one last thing I just want to circle back to the DEI thing, because that's been such a big focus of Trump's, attacks. And I know I've talked about this before, but I've been involved with DEI efforts in my company, and there's a lot of strong emotions around that term, both on the left and the right. I mean, it's not just people on the right who criticize it; some people on the left do too. I think there's a lot of misconceptions about it, and I want to address a couple of things that I've seen coming from the left as opposed to the right. Some people on the left say, not that they want companies to get rid of it, but they say, look, it's really just companies talking and not doing anything. And they enact these policies because it helps, it makes them safe from lawsuits, right? Another thing that I heard or I saw on social media that it's I understand where they're coming from, but saying, look, it's really, DEI efforts are really just to make white people feel good about themselves, or people with privilege feel good about themselves because they're pretending to help people who don't have it. And I understand that kind of skepticism, because people are skeptical of anything big companies do. But a couple of points I think or a few points that I think are worth making. Number one is, it's not just private businesses. It's, charitable organizations that are already, advocating for the rights of disadvantaged groups. It's government agencies, it's colleges and universities, it's elementary schools and high schools. It isn't just, it's easy to think of when you hear a phrase that sounds like a corporate phrase, you automatically associate it with the Fortune 500, or you associate it with big tech companies, whatever it is. So I understand the skepticism, but DEI is something that people get involved in, in all levels of the economy, but also in all kinds of public organizations and public institutions and government bodies. So it isn't just big corporations. That's one thing I think is worth pointing out. The other thing I think is important to point out is that whatever the corporate CEO says about their company's DEI, or the HR director says, you gotta appreciate the fact that they're not the ones doing the work.
No.
They may support it and they may believe in it, and I don't want to suggest that it's all BS, when it comes from the C-suite. But the reality is that the people who are actually involved in these efforts are rank and file employees up and down the corporate hierarchy, who really do want a better work environment for everybody. They want a more diverse work environment. They want people who are already at the company, who are in marginalized groups, to feel safe and comfortable and have a good place to work. And they also want those folks to be able to advance and get promotions and get good job assignments and things like that. Look, it's fashionable on the left in America to see a distinction between social justice, like fighting against discrimination and so forth, and economic justice. But this is both. DEI efforts are a matter of economic justice, because if you're going to fight for workers and the rights of workers and working conditions and so forth, you have to include everybody. And you can't say, well, we're going to fight for the ability to unionize, or we're going to go on strike in order to get better pay or better benefits or better conditions, but not also care about having a diverse workplace so that people from other backgrounds in your community have the same economic opportunity that you have. So it is a matter of economic justice. And whatever the people at the top of the corporate hierarchy say about it, and no matter how cynical you may be about what they say, and by the way, just as an aside, there's a lot of statistical evidence that shows that it actually is good for companies to have a more diverse workforce, because most companies are not dealing with the people outside the company are diverse. The people outside the company, the vendors and the customers and the people that they deal with in the industry, are from all different backgrounds. So having people in the company that reflect the people you're dealing with outside the company is beneficial. So there's a lot of evidence that shows that it actually does make financial sense. But apart from that, those are the people who are actually doing the heavy lifting. It's people who are lower level employees who are just trying to get by and keep a roof over their head and food on their table, but they also want to make sure that everybody has that opportunity. And there are, whether people understand it or not, there are a lot of marginalized people who are very much involved in DEI efforts within companies or within government organizations or schools or whatever. There are Black folks who work on DEI. There are gay people who work on DEI. There are trans people who work on DEI. There are Jewish people and Muslim people and people of every conceivable background who are working on it, and a lot of women working on it. It's not just a matter of white corporate executives saying things to make themselves feel good and to keep their companies from getting sued. And I understand the cynicism and the skepticism. I'm not criticizing anybody when I say this, but if you've looked at it from the inside, it's different from the way it looks on the outside.
Definitely.
So that's my
That was
pitch.
very well said. That was very well said.
Well, and no matter how cynical you may be, you still don't want companies to abandon it, because you don't want to go back to the way things were. And I guarantee you, if we keep tabs on these companies that are rolling back DEI, you're going to see levels of Black employment within those companies fall. You'll see Hispanic employment within those companies fall. You'll see fewer women at least in the higher positions of these companies. You'll see fewer people of an Asian background, Jewish employees, Muslim employees, and so on and so forth. It will have that effect over time. And so again, that's economic justice. Fighting back against that is economic justice. So don't discount that aspect of it, no matter how cynical you may be.
And the other thing about that is when you're talking about, the workforce and things like that, for many years, almost 20 years, I worked in the architecture industry, and having a diverse group of people working on projects that are like people are going to live in and work in and everything. If you only have one perspective, you miss everybody's ideas and everybody's backgrounds that come together to collaborate and make those ideas into something that's more magical than if you have just white men at the top making all the decisions and designing everything and creating everything. You're never you need that, kind of thing. So it's just a lot.
A great example of that, and of course, we'll talk more about this in other episodes, but a great example of that was one of the companies that you worked for had come up with a proposed design for, I think it was a locker room, to protect privacy for everyone.
Yes.
To sort of eliminate some of the issues or non-issues involving transgender people using those kinds of spaces. They said, look, everybody wants privacy. It's not just about whether or not a transgender person comes into the locker room. But let's create these spaces that in a way that they respect everyone, including transgender people, and then we can all, stop obsessing over this weird thing and let people live their lives.
They actually created a restroom in the San Francisco airport that is for anybody. The men and women and children can come in. The door goes all the way to the
like
ground.
George Costanza
Exactly.
predicted,
right,
or wanted.
And you just go in, and it's an individual door. It goes all the way down. People are coming in, and it's totally fine. So yeah, we'll post a link to that. But we would love to hear your comments. Please, if you don't feel like leaving a comment, you can reach us by Instagram at Jen and Dave, and leave us a direct message, and we would be happy to talk to you that way. But I was just fired up about this, and I just needed to get it off my chest, because it's weighing on me every single day. Like, what is going to happen tomorrow? Kind of thing. Right. So we know that you guys, some of you, most of you feel the same way we do, but you can listen to us wherever you listen to podcasts, and we appreciate if you made it this far. Thank you.
Yeah, and as we've done in the past, the audio will be available on our website and on Apple Podcasts and other podcast platforms. And the video will be available on our YouTube channel and on our Instagram.
I would also just like to say, too, if you have any topics or questions for us that you'd want us to cover, we're happy to entertain those as well.
And they don't have to just be about politics or Donald Trump.
Yeah, and we have to go because our cat needs us.
Sorry.
We're coming, Gordy.
We're coming, Gordy. We should have. I was going to get up and let her in, but I'm looking at the clock and we're getting close to the end, and I'm like, well.
Exactly. She can go out there for a minute.
Good night, everybody.
Bye.